This has been a week at Reformed Seminary where I teach, graduation week on Friday night. They walked the aisles in Orlando at our campus, and I was so proud of them. We're very rigorous academically, and these guys have burned the midnight oil for 3 years. And I looked at them and wanted to weep, and I thought, you know, God's going to use these men and women to change the world. Then on Thursday night, before graduation, we had our seniors banquet. And that's a cool time, too. Dr. Stephen Childers, my dear friend and colleague, who probably knows more about missions and church planting than anybody in the history of the church, spoke to our seniors. And he talked about the things he wished somebody had told him at a seniors banquet before he got out of seminary. And his list was profound. As he talked, I thought my list would be a little bit different. I'd tell them, check your zipper before you preach. I'd say, don't drop the baby and don't drop a stogie in the communion cup. I would say, and whatever you do, don't forget the name of the dead man in the casket for whom you're doing the funeral. But seriously, I would tell them, because nobody ever told me, I would tell them how they're going to feel when they stand before God's people and their hands are dirty. I understand Isaiah. Woe is me, for I am a man of unclean lips, and I dwell in the midst of a people of unclean lips. Do you have any idea how hard it is for somebody like me to do something like this? I thought for years I'd just get better and better, that I would get more pure and nicer and more obedient and more committed. And in that process, I would teach people to be more pure, obedient, and committed than they were. And we'd join hands and walk off in the sunset together with Jesus, but it didn't happen that way. Sometimes it got worse, and I got to stand before God's people. If you've heard me teach, you know that before I teach or preach, I always pray a prayer in which I say, forgive the one who teaches his sins, because they're many. I do a lot of controversial things, but that really ticks people off. I get more letters than you can imagine on that prayer, but I got a sweet letter a couple of weeks ago. It was a pastor, and he said, Steve, I just love your teaching, but I wish you wouldn't pray that prayer. You're giving people the wrong idea. And I wanted to write back and say, no, I'm not. I'm a cross-dresser. Kind of shock them, but I didn't. I wrote back and said, I'm not giving them the wrong idea. I'm telling them the truth. It's called a disclaimer. The views and opinions of the one who teaches do represent the views and the opinions of the management, but his life doesn't always. I couldn't preach if I didn't pray that prayer, because it's hard for somebody like me to do something like this. I wish God had written more about booze in the Bible. You ought to hear my sermon on total abstinence. I don't drink, and I sound like Jonathan Edwards. I guess in the 7 deadly sins, I can do the one on sloth. You sluggards, because I'm a workaholic, and that has its problems too. And I can do a text on prayer without feeling very guilty, because I really am a man of prayer. If you're like me, you better be. I mean, it takes a long time just to confess, but I can do the text on prayer without wincing and feeling so guilty. But that's about the end of the list. The rest really are really hard. And the text we have this morning, particularly so. I honestly believe that God told me to teach this text. I said, no. And he said, yes. I said, are you sure? That they know me. Let's do something on booze. And, and he said in Hebrew, of course, study to show thyself approved. And I did. And I discovered some stuff that is so good, I can just hardly wait. Open your Bible to the 6th chapter of Luke. Feel free to look around and see who didn't bring theirs. And I'm going to start at the 27th verse of the 6th chapter, where Luke the physician says that Jesus said, but I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To any who strikes you on the cheek, offer him the other also. And from one who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, don't demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. If you love those who love you, what benefit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them. And if you do good to those who do good to you, what benefit is that to you? For even sinners do the same. And if you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that for you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. But love your enemies and do good and lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great, and you will be called the sons of the Most High. For he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful, even as your Father is merciful. Judge not, and you won't be judged. Condemn not, and you will not be condemned. Forgive, and you will be forgiven. Give, and it will be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap. For with the measure you use, it will be measured back to you. He also told them a parable. Can a blind man lead a blind man? Will they not both fall into a pit? A disciple is not above his teacher, but everyone, when he is fully trained, will be like his teacher. Why do you see the speck that's in your brother's eye, but you do not notice the log that's in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, brother, let me take out the speck that's in your eye, when you yourself don't see the log that is in your own eye? You hypocrite. First take out the log in your own eye, and then you'll see clearly to take out the speck that is in your brother's eye. Now, but before we get down, I want to go down one side road, and it's this. Don't make this text carry more weight than God intended. This text is not given to God's people so that we could get a lobotomy and be nice all the time and be pacifist and smile. That's not what this text is saying. It's saying that we have to speak the truth. It's talking about the position from which we speak that truth. Did you hear about the woman who went to the doctor, and the nurse was getting her basic information, and she said, how tall are you? And she said, I'm 5'9". Said, how much do you weigh? And she said, I weigh 130 pounds. Then the nurse put her on the scale and measured her, and she said, you know, you weigh 173 pounds, and you're 5'4". Then she took her blood pressure and it went through the roof, and the nurse said, man, that's bad. And the lady said, of course it's bad. When I came in here, I was tall and thin, and now I'm short and fat. You ever notice how people, when they come in here, turn nice? You know, you get these pagans that are really earthy and strong and facing the world, and then they find Jesus and wilt. What's with that? That's a glitch in our discipling process. What have we done to those people? I love M. Scott Peck's book, The Road Less Traveled. That's a profound book. It was written a number of years ago before he became a Christian. He said things like that the source of all mental illness is an inappropriate effort to avoid pain. That's so profound, I could hardly stand it. I love that book. Then he became a Christian, and shortly after he wrote a book called The People of the Lie. And that was a pretty good book too. I haven't read what he's written in a long time, but I saw a book in the airport, and it was called The Road Less Traveled Revisited. And I read it. Then I burned it. It's awful. He's turned nice on it. I mean, I don't know what he's been smoking, man. I just wish he wouldn't. What is that? Jesus didn't die to make you nice. And so don't make this text do stuff it's not supposed to do. We're not supposed to say we don't see evil anymore and become weenies. We see things, we understand things, we judge. That's not what Jesus is talking about. He's talking about the position from which we speak. And so let's turn to that text. I really have had a fit with it. Love your enemies, be good to those who aren't good to you. They whack you upside the head, you turn the other side of your head. That's crazy, man. That's hard. Do you know I carry a gun? I really do. The Bible says that if you're persecuted for Jesus' sake, you got to take whatever they give you and bless them. I mean, whatever they do to your family, whatever they do to your goods, you have to, as a Christian, to not respond. But if it's random violence, you can shoot those suckers. And you never know, when random violence is going to sneak up behind you somewhere. I had a psychiatrist say, Brown, you live on the edge of hostility. And one of my associates said, you spit on the ground and the grass withers. You think you got trouble with this? I really do have trouble with this. And I've taught it 1,000 times, but never the way I'm going to teach it to you this morning. I've taught it 1,000 times. I always said, look, I know it's hard. I know that it's hard, but you got to work. It's a process, sanctification. It is, by the way. And you become more and more religious, and then you love people more. And you forgive people easier, and you can turn the other cheek. And I know it's hard, and you're not there yet, but let's work at it. And eventually, that's from the pit of hell. That smells like smoke. That's not what Jesus is talking about here. My brother was a Marine, served in Vietnam. Then he became the district attorney in the 28th Congressional District, and then he died. And I miss him more than I can tell you. He was my best friend. I ran his media campaign. And this Republican would go to Democratic meetings. If he knew how much I loved him, he would know how much that cost me. And my brother would speak, and I'd want to jump up and say, that's my kid brother. Is he something else? He was telling me about the time that a pilot landed a 747 in the wrong airport in Vietnam. He was supposed to land at Da Nang, but he landed in a much smaller airport 100 miles away. And the pilot said to the tower, do you see me? And the tower said, no, we don't see you. And he said, yeah, you got to see me. And they said, no, we don't. He said, I'm going to land. So he landed. And then he said, do you see me now? And they said, no. He said, what do you mean you don't see me? It's a 747. And then he realized he's in the wrong airport. And he doesn't have enough runway to get out. So they call the officer, the commanding officer, and he said, what do I do? And he said, son, I don't know. You got it in there, you get it out. I sort of felt this text was like, we got this way, now fix it, get it out. You turn mean, now don't be so mean, be nice, work on it. That's not what Jesus is saying. Let me show you what he's saying. Now look, if you have to go to the bathroom, go now. Don't walk out in the middle of this because you got to hear the whole thing or you're not going to get it. So just sit there, okay, or I'll call your name. First thing I want you to see is Jesus' call to radical obedience. Look at the 27th verse. But I say to you who hear, love your enemies. Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who abuse you. To one who strikes you on the cheek, offer him the other also. From him who takes away your cloak, do not withhold your tunic either. Give to everyone who begs from you. From him who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. And as you wish that others would do to you, do so to them. Guys, you can't get away from that. That's radical obedience. Jesus does not talk about self-actualization. He talks about self-death. He doesn't talk about having a good self-image. He talks about having no image that says anything that's wonderful about us. He says, this is what it means to belong to me. It means coming to the end of yourself. And I wish he hadn't said that, but he did, and you can't soften it. We're reformed. And wherever you find the law in the scriptures, you don't say we're not under the law anymore, so you can't do that. This is what pleases God. This is the place where he calls us. I may have taught it here before. The difference between real guilt and false guilt. Real guilt is where you do something bad, you feel guilty, you get punished, and you're free. That's healthy. That's good stuff. That's why prisons can't be just rehabilitative. They have to be retributive too. In other words, there has to be justice so the prisoners can really be free. So you do something bad, you feel bad, guilty, then you get punished, then you're free. And as Christians, we know that Jesus took the third of those tests, of that paradigm of guilt, and we are now free. Now let me tell you what false guilt is. False guilt is when there's no one, and if there's no one, there's never a four. If you've been abused or shamed or demeaned or put down, and you feel like you're dirt and that you're nobody and nobody could ever care, nobody could ever love you because of your issues, you feel bad. Then what do you try to do? You try to get punished, but you don't get free. You feel more guilty, and then you punish yourself more, and then you go around on 2 and 3 forever. If you understand that, that'll change your life. But what we have, Jesus says, is real guilt. We really do. I'm on the board of Harvest USA in Philadelphia, and we deal with people who are sexually broken, primarily the gay and lesbian community, and with compassion and love, but without compromise. In our studies and the studies of others, they found that 1 in 3 men in America, this includes pastors and men in the church, 1 in 3 men and seminary students, 1 in 3 men in America are addicted to one form of pornography or another. And so when I'm speaking to men's conferences, I say, guys, look to your left. If he looks clean, look to your right. If he looks clean, you're it. I've never said that some guys didn't come up to me and say, hey, Steve, could I talk to you a minute? Let me tell you something. Look to your left, look to your right, and then to your own heart, and you're it. You can't soften that. If you soften it, you move into heresy. Jesus is saying it's not self-actualization, it's self-death. We're called to glorify God. That's our business, not to glorify ourselves, and you can't do both. Okay, that's the first thing. Then the second thing I want you to see from this text is not only God's call to radical obedience, look at Jesus' reference to a radical God. Look at the 35th verse. But love your enemies, do good, lend, expect nothing in return. Your reward will be great in heaven. You will be the sons of the Most High. For, here comes sports fans, for he is kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful even as your Father is merciful. If you've heard me teach much, you know that I've been called to tell you guys, people who are believers, that God's not angry at them. And he's not. You think he is, but he isn't. And he knows you. Because of the imputation of Christ's righteousness and the blood of Christ shed on the cross, no matter how many windows you broke and are still breaking. I absolutely loved Randy's illustration. It's mine. I'm going to give him credit the first time, and after that I'm going to say as I always say. You think it would work if I changed the sister to a brother? Whatever. No matter how many windows you've broken, God's not angry at you. He'll never be angry at you, ever again. But because everywhere I speak, there are people who aren't Christians, I feel constrained to say, but listen, if you're not a believer, you ought to be afraid. You ought to be very afraid, because you're living under the wrath of a holy God. I'd do business with him if I were you. Now, I still believe that. But can we talk? I'm going to say it softer from now on because of this text. You ever think that maybe God likes gays and lesbians more than we do? Or that God likes Dan Brown, maybe even read the Da Vinci Code? I mean, why did a Brown have to write it? That's crazy. Why couldn't a Smith write that book? And we get our underwear too tight and we're going to boycott the world and all in Christendom's going to come down. Have you read that book? That's a fun book. Stupid book. But listen, it's fiction. And then you watch him being interviewed, and he says that while it's fiction, it's based on fact. And you're going to go, what? Have you ever read a history? Do you have any idea about the manuscripts? Do you know anything about Gnosticism? You don't have a lick of sense. You don't have the brains of an amoeba. How can you write that good? That's crazy. But you ever think that God really likes Dan Brown more than we do? Or that he likes abortion? I hope not. That God, if I were God, I'd kick the world to pieces. That he likes abortionists better than we do, and pornographers better than we do, and the atheists who won't come to church, who mow their lawns on Sunday better than we like. Do you ever think that? That's what this text says about God. It isn't saying God is good to his people. We know that. He's talking about God is good to the people who aren't his people. How about that? He says to the ungrateful and the evil that he shows mercy, and we're to be merciful the way he is merciful. One time Abraham Lincoln visited a prison camp and the hospital of Confederate soldiers, and Southern boys aren't happy with that sort of thing. We're not even sure it's over yet. And Lincoln came, and they were irritated about it. And instead of saying anything, Lincoln stood in the ward and he wept. And their hearts broke before him. That's what the cross is. So we worship a radical God, and I believe in the wrath of God, but I'm going to say that softer when I'm talking to pagans from now on than I've said it in the past. And then thirdly, I want you to see not only radical obedience and a radical God, I want you to look at the radical honesty to which he calls us. Look at 37. Judge not, and you'll be not judged. You won't be judged. Condemn not, you won't be condemned. Forgive, you'll be forgiven. Give, it'll be given to you. Good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, put into your lap. And then he told him a parable. And he said, can a blind man lead a blind man? And then further on, he said, why do you not see the log that's in your own eye, but you see the speck that's in your brother? Now, Jesus isn't saying work hard at getting the log out of your eyes so you can be self-righteous. Now listen to me. When he says, judge not, and you will not be judged, what is the implication of that? The implication is that you have every expectation of being judged, because you deserve it. Me too. When he says forgive and you'll be forgiven, what's the implication of that? I'm not talking about in your past life or you knew Jesus. I'm talking about now. What's the implication of that? The implication of that is that you have a whole lot for which you need to be forgiven. The thing that's irritating about this text is that Jesus says we're not any better than they are. Whoa, what about that, sports fans? Jesus says that we're not any better than they are. And if you miss that in the text, you miss the awesome power of what Jesus is saying. He's not saying be gooder so you can be self-righteous. He's saying recognize who you are. Recognize why God didn't send a book, but he sent his son. Recognize the depth of your own rebellion, and you know it's there, that we're not any different than they are. We've just run to Jesus, and he's loved us. That's the difference. You say, don't we get any better? Yeah. But the better you get, the more he shows you and the worse you know. That's why only bad people can do truly good things. And then notice not only radical obedience, not only a radical God, not only a radical honesty. Don't you hate that word radical? I should have gotten a better one. Everybody said radical, man, dude, radical. But notice the radical solution. It's verses 37 through 38. Judge not, you won't be judged. Condemn, you won't be condemned. Forgive, you will be forgiven. Give, it'll be given to you. Good measure, shake down, push down in your lap. What's the solution? Well, a couple of things. Jesus is saying, when he talks about the blind leading the blind, what's he talking about? He's talking about people who become Christians, who follow him, who get gooder and gooder and gooder when they really are blind, and they try to lead pagans around, and they both fall into a hole. So what's the solution that this is so good. If you've been sleeping, wake up. This is so good. I can hardly wait to tell you. We live in glass houses. We're called to be the light of the world. You don't take your light, Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, and put it under a bushel. You let it shine. Shine for Jesus. Well, let me tell you something. If you're as bad as Jesus said you were, and me too, I'm worse, you got to know, you think you're feeling guilty. You should have had to work on this all week. If you're as bad as Jesus says we're bad, and you're going to shine for Jesus, shine, you're going to be very, very careful. People who need forgiveness, forgive other people. People who could be judged and deserve it, don't judge other people. Because if you live in glass houses and your light is shining, you simply do not throw rocks. And when you do, you blow the whole thing. I need mercy, guys. I really do. I can go down to any drug addict. I can speak for any DA or AA group. I can go down to the homosexual community in Philadelphia and have. I can go on any campus, any place, and talk to a bunch of atheists and say to them, I'm so screwed up, I can hardly stand it. But let me tell you about a man who loves me. Let me tell you about Jesus. That's the solution. The solution isn't to get better and better and better so you can help other people get better. The solution is begin to see yourself as you really are. The difference between us and them isn't that we are less needy. We're probably more needy. Not that do you know what you announced to the world when you came to this church service? You said to the world, if you understand what biblical doctrine says, that you are screwed up, that you are needy and in desperate need of forgiveness. And you've run to the only place that you knew. And once we understand that, we'll change the world. We really will. But let me show you, look, we can't go till we see the final point. Jesus not only talks about a radical God, radical obedience, a radical solution, he talks about a radical reward. Listen to this. This is verse 35. But love your enemies, do good, lend, expecting nothing in return, and your reward will be great in heaven. No, it doesn't say that. Your reward will be great, and you'll be sons of the Most High, for he's kind to the ungrateful and the evil. Be merciful as your Father in heaven is merciful. 38th verse, given it'll be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, will be put into your lap, for with the measure you use, you will be measured back to you. Remember when the rich young ruler came to Jesus, and Peter didn't know what to say, so he said it. You remember the rich young ruler left because he was sorrowful. He had such great possessions. And Jesus was sad too. And Peter interrupted Jesus' thoughts and said, hey, what about us? We left everything to follow you. What's in it for us? Now, if I'd been Jesus, I would have said, Peter, that is an inappropriate question after all that God has done for you. You know, Jesus didn't do that. He told him. He said, you're going to get a lot of neat stuff now, and you're going to live forever. How about that? Don't you think you gave anything up? You're going to be blessed out of your mind. You're going to be blessed out of your socks. I'm going to bless you so big. That's what's in it for you, okay, Peter? Well, Jesus is doing exactly the same thing here. This has sounded like bad news. I can't do that. I've got to keep up a good front. No, you don't. Once you understand what Jesus is teaching in this text, then you start getting blessed. If you looked at the title when you came in, you thought, oh my, they're going to tar and feather Steve. When being bad isn't bad enough, only truly bad people can do truly good things. How about that? Listen, once you understand that grace in every place, in every time, universally, always runs downhill, then you've got it. Because when you're on the top of the hill and you're good, listen, you've heard me say that your obedience is the most dangerous place in your life when you know it. And your sin is the biggest gift that God gives you when you know that. Let me tell you something else. Only bad people do good things. If you're good, you can't do truly good things at the same time. Is that cool or what? I'm going to teach this text a lot. And I'm not going to feel guilty. And I'm going to see Christians going into the world with a joy and a freedom that they never experienced. I'm a Republican, okay? I know some of you are Democrats. That's all right, too. When Jesus comes back, you'll know the truth. Last night, this final illustration became too political, and I got attacked in the parking lot, but only after this person had attacked Randy first, so he took the brunt of it. And she just couldn't get to me. And when she got to me, this is not a political statement. I know that some of you are Democrats, but I'm a Republican. Chuck Colson spoke for our graduation in Orlando on Friday night. I remember when Chuck got, and I had met him early on, and he said that when he was first convicted and was going to prison, the first thing he did is he registered as a Democrat. And everybody said, why? He said, well, I didn't want to see a Republican go to prison like that. Well, see, I understood that. So you got to know I'm a Republican when I say this, but I didn't vote for Bill Clinton, okay? Nor will I ever vote for Bill Clinton for anything, okay? Bill Clinton gave so many Christians, however, this is what really bothers me, an opportunity to feel self-righteous. But we just don't share the same basic political philosophy, okay? I think the irrational hatred of George Bush is satanic. And by the way, I think the irrational hatred of Bill Clinton was satanic. I'd like to have a beer with him. I don't drink, but if I did, I'd like to have a beer with him. You know, I don't want him to be president, but I think he's the kind of guy I'd like to be around. Well, at any rate, with all of that being said, so you know, and don't be offended if you're a Democrat. 20 things came to my mind to say, and Randy, you're looking at an amazing demonstration of restraint. in God's grace. All right, listen. let me tell you something that Bill Clinton said that was profound. It was after the impeachment trial, and he had emerged victorious, you remember, and he had a press conference. And when he was standing in front of the reporters, one of the reporters asked this of the president. He said, "Mr. President, are you going to forgive the people who have done this to you?" And then he said something that was so good. He said this. He said, "I need forgiveness. And people who ask forgiveness must be willing to give it." Do you know Bill Clinton signed a book last week for $5 million advance on leadership? Do you know that in the polls, every poll they take, he is one of the 2 most popular people in the entire world? If you, with me, are surprised by that, if you say, "What's with that?" If you listen to what I taught you this morning, you know. You think about that. Amen.